I hear a lot about the Bible Belt here in the South. I hear a lot in the Bible Belt here about there's the Bible Belt. A lot of churches, a lot of people call themselves Christians. I'm going to attack all of the Christian churches. I'm not going to spare any of you. I think all of you have good things, but you have all strayed from what this book says. I'm not trying to be an upstart to try to disrupt the church. I'm coming here to tell you the truth of what's really in this. You're telling us we're wrong, and let's face it, the Jews kind of stick to themselves, but the Muslims and the Christians, and even in the Eastern religions, well, some of them are a lot more generous. You see a lot more things done in Oriental countries for people. Even in jobs, they buy them dinner. I've seen how they do this with companies they own in the United States. They buy their people dinners when they work overtime and stuff. They actually show appreciation to their workers. Christians in America don't. Where are you failing? You're not reading this. You're not following your own beliefs, and I'm going to attack you for this over and over and over. What do you love more? If you're rich, that's why Jesus said it's easier for a camel to go through the eye of the needle. And let's explain the eye of the needle. The eye of the needle in ancient Rome and Israel at that time was a small gateway for people that stood roughly 3 to 4 feet high and about this wide. All right, just wide enough for someone to crouch and slip through. It was a slip-through doorway, kind of a back door into the city. That's where they allowed the undesirables were brought in through that gate. That was a gate to keep out the undesirables. So a camel that you imagine is a several 100-pound animal, close to probably 1,000 pounds. Usually they stand about 5 to 6 feet at the shoulders and have this huge hump and a long neck and these gangly legs. There's no way they're going to fit through a space that's 20 to 24 inches by 3 feet to 4 feet high. They're just not going to do it unless they're dead and you cut their legs off. So when he said it's easier, so it's not really actually eye of a needle, but it might as well be, because that opening, I've seen them, they are so small, it would be impossible for anything but a newborn camel to maybe fit through that hole. But he said it's easier for a camel to do that, so we don't lose where we're at. Easier for a camel to go through the eye of the needle than for a rich man to enter heaven. Why? Because money becomes his number one thing. You put anything else before the Lord, and that is your God. You are not loving the Lord, you're loving it. That leads you in that right then into all the others. All of these are interconnected and can all lead into each other. All of them can cause problems with the others. You start lying, you start coveting, you start lusting after money instead of loving the Lord and following Him. You start lusting after this money. What do? That's all you care about. I said, I'm not doing this to preach. I'm doing this to point out that Christians are not so perfect as you let on. So these are the highest two and the most important that was stressed upon, because if we distract ourselves, then we're no longer honoring Him and loving Him. We're loving something else that's more important than us. And whether you believe in Jesus or God or the Lord, anything or not, this book is a guide to how we should treat each other. Whether you want to believe that some aliens, some mystics, just some wise men wrote this book, because there are some facts about this book. For the size that it is, and for as long as they have been recording it, we have a copy of this that is 2,000 years old in Hebrew, and a copy that's 1,000 years old in Hebrew. We compare it to the modern day. All three of them match in the original Hebrew and Greek that the Jews, the Hebrew that the Jews have been copying, match word for word. And it matches word for what we have in the original Greek to 2,000 years ago from the Dead Sea Scrolls. Every book was in there but the Book of Esther. For book historians, that is a miracle for any book to have someone copy it. I'd even like to do this test. I may get the people to do this. We won't tell them what it's for, but I'm going to do this test. It's called the circle test, or there's a million different names. You tell one person one sentence. By the time it goes around to the 20 people and gets back to the original person, there's only 2 to 3 words of the original sentence in it. The Bible has went for 2,000 years through thousands and millions of people's hands, but yet it still has been copied perfectly by the Jews for 2,000 years. You cannot deny that. That is a fact. And that is a miracle. The other miracle about this book is, even if it was written by man, he was the greatest genius that ever wrote it. Because in no place does it contradict itself. You say that, oh yeah, there's places where God says, don't kill, but yet he wiped out a whole city. That's not a contradiction. All right, contradiction is where you talk about a thing and then you say just the opposite. I'm going to use Star Trek as a perfect example, but in Star Trek, a lot of people that are Trekkie fans, you can relate to this, and that's why I'm using it. In the original Star Trek series, they said that Zefram Cochrane came from Alpha Centauri, and he was the man who invented the warp engine. But when they did the movie 25, 30 years later, they placed him on Earth. That is a contradiction. This book, the Bible, does not contradict itself like that in one spot. That in itself, by book historians, is miraculous. It's an impossibility. People just don't do that. Like I said, whoever wrote this, if it was not an inspired being or an alien or something, he was the most intelligent man on earth and probably should have been rated as a god. Because any man that could do that, if you know anything about books, I read series of books and they contradict themselves all the time. Even reading the Dune series of books by Frank Herbert. When his son went back, he contradicted some of the stuff his father said, and even contradicted some of his own books. So it's very hard to keep a story straight. One of the reasons we shouldn't lie. The more you lie, harder it is to keep your story straight. Better to stick with the truth. The truth goes right on. You can't challenge the truth. And this book was written for people, for us to treat each other a certain way. Regardless of how you believe, we need to follow at least how we treat each other by this book.